When most histories of the Korean War focus on battles and troop movements, they often overlook the quiet, deliberate ways in which soldiers and locals adapted to the environment. One of the lesser-known realities is how timber, used in shelters, fortifications and bridges, was not merely cut and assembled, but deliberately treated through cold, smoke and time to resist water, rot and fire. These techniques were not modern inventions. They were rooted in centuries of local practice, yet they had profound implications for survival and operational effectiveness during the war. Before diving deeper, subscribe to Thermal Vault to explore the overlooked strategies, materials, and preparations that quietly shaped historical outcomes. The significance of these timber treatments became apparent in northern Korea, where harsh winters and monsoon rains could make or break an army's operational capacity. Commanders who understood the natural resilience of smoke-hardened or cold-season dried wood were able to plan around structures that would endure, while others struggled with shelters and bridges that decayed within months. This was not simply a matter of maintenance, it was an operational advantage. Timber that had been armoured by careful preparation provided reliable housing, storage and passage under extreme conditions. These practices illustrate the intersection of material science and military foresight, a lesson too often overlooked in accounts of mid-20th century conflicts. The first method, known as cold season drying, relied on the slow, deliberate removal of moisture from wood during winter months. Unlike conventional drying, which risks cracking or warping, cold season drying allowed timber to retain its structural integrity while shedding the excess water that would otherwise lead to rot. Korean villages had long relied on this technique to build houses and bridges capable of withstanding wet seasons. During the war, military engineers and local civilians applied the same method to timber intended for temporary field fortifications, supply depots and roadworks. Units that ignored the timing of this process often found their constructions compromised within weeks of placement, while those who respected it enjoyed structures that remained serviceable despite relentless exposure to rain and snow. Smoke hardening was another critical method. By exposing timber to controlled smoke for weeks, sometimes months, the wood absorbed chemicals from the combustion process, which enhanced its resistance to moisture and insects. This treatment also made the timber less flammable, which was a subtle but significant advantage when fires and incendiary devices were common threats in both offensive and defensive operations. Field reports suggest that structures built with smoke-hardened planks often outlasted untreated wood by years, even under conditions that would have quickly reduced conventional timber to rubble. In practical terms, this meant fewer repairs, less exposure for soldiers gathering replacement materials, and really greater reliability for storage and transportation infrastructure. Time itself acted as an armor. Timber that had been cured and stored for months, even years, had naturally stabilized, making it less susceptible to sudden expansion, contraction, or decay. This aging process was, a form of passive preparation, one that commanders often recognized but, rarely documented formally. In many cases, old warehouses, bridges, and traditional homes, built with such timber, were commandeered for military use, not because of their location, but because the materials themselves were proven resilient. The lesson for survivalists and planners is clear. Patience can be as effective as immediate intervention when preparing materials for harsh conditions. The integration of these methods into military logistics honestly highlights the subtlety of operational planning. Armies that relied on local knowledge or on experienced engineers could maintain supply lines and fortifications even under extreme environmental stress. Conversely, units that bypassed these practices suffered cascading consequences. Rotting bridges delayed reinforcements, unstable shelters exposed troops to frostbite and illness, and mismanaged stockpiles of wood created inefficiencies that slowed entire campaigns. In a conflict where terrain, weather, and endurance were often more decisive than raw firepower, the condition of timber was a silent determinant of operational success. Local civilians played an essential role in this process. Many had inherited knowledge of timber preparation techniques passed down through generations. Villagers who understood cold season drying, smoke hardening and timber aging were often consulted, or at times compelled, to apply their expertise to military objectives. Commanders who engaged with local populations benefited from both material advantages and smoother logistics. Disregarding these practices could lead to unnecessary destruction and hardship, forcing troops to improvise with inadequate materials. This interplay between military necessity and cultural knowledge underscores the often overlooked human dimensions of survival in wartime career. From a survival perspective, these practices provided multiple layers of security. Smoke-hardened wood resisted moisture, preventing structural collapse and reducing exposure to cold or wet conditions. Cold season-dried timber was less prone to cracking, ensuring that doors, floors and bridges remained operational when they were needed most. So, aged timber provided predictability. Soldiers could plan their movements, storage and shelter without, fearing sudden material failure. The integration of these methods really demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of environmental adaptation, material science and human endurance, extending far beyond just conventional battlefield strategy. The tactical implications were equally important. Commanders who recognized the durability of treated timber could, position troops in structures with greater confidence, store supplies in reliable facilities, and move forces across bridges that would otherwise fail under repeated load. Timber was not merely a construction material, it became a strategic asset, preserved through techniques that required both patience and precision. The consequences of ignoring this knowledge were immediate and practical: disrupted supply chains, increased exposure to environmental hazards, and honestly, reduced combat effectiveness. Additionally, these practices influenced post-war reconstruction. Timber that had been carefully treated and armored during the conflict often survived to form the backbone of rebuilding efforts, reducing the need for new materials and labor-intensive construction. In this way, centuries-old techniques not only affected wartime survival but shaped the recovery of communities and infrastructure. The Korean War, therefore, offers lessons that extend beyond its immediate historical context. The deliberate use of cold smoke and time to armor timber reveals the quiet interplay of environment, material knowledge, and human foresight. It reminds us that survival and operational success are rarely determined solely by weapons or strategy. Often they hinge on understanding resources, respecting local expertise, and exercising patience. Remembering these practices is essential because they illuminate the overlooked dimensions of human resilience in conflict. If this exploration of resilience, foresight, and historical nuance resonates, subscribe to Thermal Vault. Sharing this video helps bring attention to the subtleties of history that are too often ignored but remain essential for understanding both the past and its lessons for the present.